Life in old Hollywood looked like pure magic, glitz, glamour, iconic stars, and timeless films. But behind the silver screen lay a world filled with hidden pain, power games, and deeply disturbing truths that the studios worked hard to keep secret. What if some of the most beloved actors and actresses of the Golden Age were hiding things that could have destroyed their careers? Or worse. From dangerous backstage feuds and emotional breakdowns to shocking relationship secrets and manipulation by powerful figures. These stories paint a much darker picture of the so-called Golden Era. Even the biggest names were often trapped in systems of silence, fear, and exploitation. Stick around as we uncover 12 chilling secrets from classic Hollywood's most celebrated icons. The truth may just change how you see your favorite stars forever. Charlie Chaplin's affairs with underage girls. Charlie Chaplin remains one of the most iconic figures in the history of cinema. His signature bowler hat, cane, and silent-era comedy defined a generation. Yet, while millions adored the genius behind The Kid in modern times, Chaplin's private life told a much more unsettling story. Hidden behind the laughs was a pattern of troubling behavior involving much younger girls, something that would cause immense controversy even by the standards of the time. At the age of 29, Chaplin married his first wife, Mildred Harris, who was only 16 years old. Their marriage was short-lived and filled with conflict, largely due to the enormous age and maturity gap. But the pattern didn't stop there. A few years later, Chaplin began a relationship with another teenager, Lita Gray, who was just 15 when they met. She became pregnant at 16, prompting a swift and secretive wedding to avoid public scandal. The marriage disintegrated quickly, and their divorce proceedings were brutal and highly publicized, filled with allegations of infidelity, manipulation, and control. Despite the media backlash and legal troubles, Chaplin's career continued to thrive, perhaps a sign of how much influence studios and fame held in shielding stars from consequences. His behavior, though widely criticized, was often downplayed or overlooked because of his immense talent and cultural impact. Some even argued that Chaplin saw these relationships as romantic or artistic, though many today view them as highly inappropriate and exploitative. Later in life, Chaplin would marry Una O'Neill, daughter of playwright Eugene O'Neill. She was 18 when they wed. He was 54. Their marriage lasted until his death, and together they had 8 children. Some saw this final relationship as evidence that he had matured and found peace, but others couldn't forget the early scandals that followed him for decades. Charlie Chaplin's legacy is forever intertwined with innovation, humor, and global influence. But behind the curtain of his comedic genius lies a controversial personal history, one that complicates the image of a man who made the world laugh while living a life many found deeply troubling. Joan Crawford removed her teeth for beauty. Joan Crawford was the embodiment of Hollywood glamour, regal cheekbones, fierce eyes, and a presence that demanded attention. But behind her iconic image was a painful truth that few fans ever realized. To achieve her trademark look, Crawford took an extreme and irreversible step in her 20s. She had several of her back molars removed. The reason? To create a more sculpted, angular appearance by making her cheekbones appear higher and more defined. This drastic decision wasn't made on a whim. At the time, actresses were under intense scrutiny to maintain a flawless appearance, and studio executives were brutally clear about what was expected. Crawford, known for her perfectionism and relentless ambition, believed that altering her appearance was a necessary sacrifice for success. And in a way, it worked. Her sharply contoured face became one of the most recognizable features in Hollywood. But the pressures she faced extended far beyond physical beauty. Crawford lived in a world where appearance and control were everything. This obsession with image eventually seeped into her personal life, creating an environment of strict rules and emotional distance, especially with her children. Her adopted daughter, Christina Crawford, later published the explosive memoir Mommy Dearest, detailing the emotional and physical turmoil she endured growing up. She portrayed her mother as a woman obsessed with public perception, but detached and often cruel behind closed doors. While some questioned the accuracy of the book, many saw it as a reflection of the intense personal cost of maintaining a Hollywood facade. Joan Crawford's life was shaped by the impossible standards placed on women in the industry. She was not alone. Many actresses of her era endured extreme measures to remain in favor with studio heads and the public. Crawford's legacy is undeniably complex. She was a trailblazer, a fashion icon, and a fierce competitor. But her story also serves as a chilling reminder of the hidden sacrifices behind Hollywood beauty and the lasting impact of chasing perfection at all costs. Rita Moreno's troubled romance with Marlon Brando. Rita Moreno was a trailblazer, a brilliant actress, dancer, and singer who shattered barriers for Latina performers in Hollywood. But even her extraordinary talent couldn't protect her from one of the most emotionally turbulent relationships of the Golden Age. Behind her success was a painful love affair with legendary actor Marlon Brando, a man whose charisma was matched only by his volatility. Their relationship began in the 1950s, during the filming of Desiree. Moreno was captivated by Brando's confidence and intellect, but it wasn't long before she discovered the darker side of his personality. Throughout their on-again, off-again romance, Brando was unfaithful and manipulative, often engaging in affairs while expecting Moreno to stay loyal. The emotional toll on her was enormous. The most devastating moment came when Moreno became pregnant with Brando's child. According to her own account, Brando pressured her into ending the pregnancy, a decision that left her heartbroken. This act, combined with years of emotional neglect and betrayal, left deep scars. Moreno later admitted that she was pushed to a breaking point and struggled to cope with the overwhelming pain. Despite this chapter of her life, Rita Moreno emerged stronger. She made history by becoming one of the few entertainers to win all 4 major American Entertainment Awards: an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony. But she never shied away from telling the truth about the trauma she endured. By opening up about her experience with Brando, she gave voice to countless women in the industry who had suffered in silence. Today, Moreno is celebrated not just for her talent, but for her resilience. Her story serves as a reminder that even the most radiant stars in Hollywood have lived through shadows. Behind the lights, costumes, and accolades are real people, often forced to navigate painful relationships in an industry that rarely made space for emotional well-being. Judy Lewis, the hidden love child of Clark Gable. At the height of old Hollywood's obsession with image, few secrets were guarded as closely as this one. A child born out of wedlock between 2 major film stars could have ended careers, shattered reputations, and sent shockwaves through the industry. That's exactly what happened when a pregnancy was hidden. A baby placed in an orphanage, and a young girl raised without knowing who her real parents were. Judy Lewis grew up unaware of her true origins. To the public, she was the adopted daughter of actress Loretta Young, a seemingly generous act by a glamorous star. But behind the scenes, the truth was far more complicated. In reality, Lewis was the biological daughter of Loretta Young and Clark Gable, conceived during the filming of Call of the Wild in 1935. At the time, Gable was married to someone else, and Young was an unmarried Catholic actress. Having a child together would have created an enormous scandal. To protect their careers, Young disappeared from the spotlight during her pregnancy, later placing Lewis in an orphanage for over a year. When she returned, she adopted her own daughter in a carefully planned charade, presenting the situation to the public as a selfless act. Meanwhile, Gable never publicly acknowledged Lewis as his child, although insiders claimed he provided financial support and occasionally visited her in secret. The truth didn't come to light until decades later. As an adult, Lewis uncovered the details of her origins and eventually published a memoir telling her side of the story. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect came when she learned that her mother had kept the secret not just from the world, but from her own daughter. Even more disturbing are later accounts suggesting that Young may not have given full consent during her encounter with Gable, adding another deeply troubling layer to the story. The entire ordeal stands as a stark example of how far Hollywood would go to preserve appearances, even at the emotional expense of a child caught in the middle. Shirley Temple's near-death experience on stage. For millions, she was the cheerful child who danced, sang, and smiled her way into America's heart. But behind the sparkle and curls was a childhood filled with pressure, control, and, at one terrifying moment, real danger. What most fans never knew was that during a live public performance, a deranged woman tried to harm Shirley Temple, believing she had stolen the soul of her deceased daughter. It was during the height of Temple's fame in the 1930s when the disturbing incident occurred. A grief-stricken woman, whose child had passed away shortly before Temple became famous, convinced herself that the young actress had somehow become a reincarnation of her lost daughter. Obsessed with this belief, she attended one of Temple's performances armed with a firearm. Fortunately, security intervened before any physical harm was done, but the encounter left a chilling reminder that even child stars were not safe from the darker fringes of public obsession. The dangers Shirley Temple faced didn't stop there. Her childhood was anything but ordinary. She worked long hours on set, often surrounded by adults who managed every aspect of her life. While other children went to school and played freely, Temple was memorizing scripts, learning choreography, and being presented as the perfect child in the public eye. Her early fame robbed her of a typical upbringing and subjected her to a level of pressure no child should endure. As she grew older, the transition from beloved child star to adult actress proved challenging. Roles became scarce, and the public's interest shifted. Temple eventually stepped away from acting and found a second career in public service, serving as a U.S. ambassador and diplomat. She may have left Hollywood behind, but the effects of her early fame never completely faded. Her story is a haunting example of how even the most adored stars lived in fear and isolation, trapped between audience adoration and personal vulnerability. The crash that changed everything. One tragic event in the 1950s marked a dramatic turning point for a beloved Hollywood heartthrob whose talent once captivated audiences around the world. The incident occurred late one night after a dinner party, when a quiet drive home turned into a nightmare that would alter the course of his life forever. Montgomery Clift had been a rising star, celebrated for his emotional depth and vulnerable screen presence in films like A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity. But in 1956, after leaving a party hosted by his close friend Elizabeth Taylor, Clift lost control of his car and crashed into a telephone pole. The impact was devastating. His face was crushed, several teeth were knocked out, and he was left with extensive facial injuries that required hours of reconstructive surgery. The physical transformation was undeniable. Though doctors managed to repair much of the damage, Clift's once youthful appearance was forever changed. But the scars went deeper than the surface. After the accident, Clift began to struggle with chronic pain and emotional trauma. To cope, he turned increasingly to painkillers and alcohol, substances that gradually took hold of his life and reputation. His performances after the crash were a mix of brilliance and torment. In Judgment at Nuremberg, he delivered a haunting portrayal of a mentally impaired witness, a role that mirrored the inner turmoil he was facing off-screen. While he continued to act, the demands of the industry clashed with his declining health and unstable personal life. Friends and co-stars noticed the shift. Gone was the confident, boyish actor who had once rivaled Brando and Dean. In his place stood a man haunted by pain, self-doubt, and a sense of isolation. Clift passed away at the age of 45, and though the official cause was heart failure, those close to him believed the emotional and physical strain had taken a far deeper toll. His story serves as a powerful example of how quickly fame and promise can unravel after a single tragic moment, especially in an industry where appearance and vitality were everything. A comedic legend's darkest side. Audiences knew him as one half of the beloved comedy duo that defined early Hollywood slapstick. With his expressive face and impeccable timing, he brought joy to millions through laughter. But away from the stage lights and cameras, a much darker narrative unfolded, one involving emotional instability, addiction, and disturbing allegations from those closest to him. Stan Laurel, the skinny one from the famous Laurel and Hardy partnership, was a master of physical comedy. Yet behind the cheerful performances, his personal life was marred by a long struggle with alcoholism. It wasn't just casual drinking. His dependency deeply affected his relationships and fueled troubling behavior, particularly during his turbulent marriage to his third wife, Vera Ivanova Shuvalova. In divorce proceedings, Vera accused Laurel of being verbally abusive, physically threatening, and emotionally erratic. One of the most alarming claims was that during a drunken rage, Laurel dug a shallow grave in their backyard and threatened to bury her alive. She also alleged that he once pointed a gun at her during an argument. While these accusations were never proven in court, they painted a deeply unsettling picture of a man struggling to reconcile fame with his own inner chaos. Hollywood insiders whispered about Laurel's repeated breakdowns and growing reliance on alcohol, especially during the later years of his career. Financial troubles, failed relationships, and legal battles only added fuel to the fire. Despite his personal challenges, he continued to perform and remained a respected figure in the entertainment world until his death in 1965. What makes this secret especially jarring is the contrast between Laurel's public persona and the private man few really knew. To fans, he was a harmless goofball. To those closest to him, he was unpredictable, sometimes frightening, and deeply affected by the pressures of fame. His story is a reminder that even comedy legends can carry personal burdens too heavy for laughter to erase. A fatal night the industry wanted to forget. What began as an ordinary drive home turned into a tragedy that the film industry quietly swept under the rug. Long before he became one of Hollywood's most celebrated directors, a rising talent was involved in a car accident that would leave one person dead and leave behind a storm of questions, rumors, and whispers that never quite went away. In 1933, John Huston, who would later gain acclaim for directing classics like The Maltese Falcon and The African Queen, was behind the wheel when his car struck and killed a young actress named Tula Rulon. The crash occurred in the early morning hours after a night of drinking, and by the time authorities arrived, it was too late to save her. Though Huston faced a coroner's inquest, he was ultimately cleared of any legal wrongdoing. No charges were filed, and the death was ruled an accident. But the story didn't end there. Behind the scenes, rumors began to swirl that Huston may not have been the one driving after all. Some speculated that a more powerful figure, Clark Gable, according to some whispers, had been behind the wheel and that Huston took the fall to protect him. These claims were never substantiated, and Huston never publicly addressed them in detail. Still, the idea of a cover-up lingered for years, casting a shadow over his otherwise celebrated career. For Huston, the accident was reportedly a source of lifelong guilt. Friends noted a change in him after the incident. He became more introspective, more reserved. The young woman's life, meanwhile, was quietly forgotten by the industry she had tried to break into. No tributes, no press campaigns, just silence. This episode highlights how the power dynamics of early Hollywood could bury even the most tragic events. With the right influence and legal maneuvering, a fatal night could be spun into silence, and the world would simply move on. A voice shaped by childhood pain. Audiences saw a glamorous figure whose voice could captivate and whose beauty seemed effortless. But beneath the surface of stardom was a history marked by instability, loneliness, and unresolved trauma, experiences that left lasting emotional scars and even shaped how she spoke. Marilyn Monroe, one of the most iconic figures in Hollywood history, endured a deeply turbulent childhood. Born Norma Jean Mortensen, she was placed in foster care shortly after birth. Her mother suffered from severe mental health challenges, and with no father present, Monroe was shuffled between foster homes and orphanages throughout her early years. The result was a deep sense of abandonment and fear that she carried into adulthood. One manifestation of this trauma was a noticeable stutter that emerged during her youth. As a child, she struggled to communicate clearly, often pausing or repeating words, a sign of the anxiety and uncertainty she lived with daily. Though she would eventually train herself to overcome the stutter, traces of it lingered even in her later performances, giving her voice its breathy, almost whispered quality that became her signature. Monroe's rise to fame didn't erase the psychological weight of her past. Despite becoming a cultural icon, she battled anxiety, depression, and a sense of being misunderstood. The pressure to maintain a flawless image, both physically and emotionally, was relentless. Studio executives controlled everything from her wardrobe to her public appearances, leaving little room for personal freedom. In her final years, Monroe's life was marked by a mix of professional success and personal decline. She became increasingly isolated, and her dependence on medication to cope with insomnia and emotional distress grew more pronounced. When she passed away at just 36 years old, the public mourned the loss of a legend, but few fully understood the fragile person behind the fame. Her story is a reminder that the stars who shone the brightest often did so while hiding the deepest pain, sometimes masked behind a smile, a screen persona, or even the sound of a carefully practiced voice. Obsession behind the camera. Behind the lens of some of cinema's most iconic thrillers was a director whose genius shaped an entire genre, but whose off-camera behavior revealed a much darker reality. For one rising actress, working with him on a career-defining role turned into a nightmare of surveillance, control, and emotional pressure that would alter her career forever. During the production of The Birds in 1963, Alfred Hitchcock became fixated on Tippi Hedren, a model-turned-actress who had been personally selected for the role. While the film was groundbreaking in its use of suspense and visual effects, what occurred behind the scenes was equally chilling. According to Hedren, Hitchcock's interest quickly crossed professional boundaries. He isolated her from other cast members, attempted to control her schedule, and even made repeated unwanted advances. As filming progressed, his behavior intensified. In one disturbing instance, Hitchcock insisted on using live birds during a scene in which Hedren's character is attacked. She had been assured the birds would be mechanical. Instead, for 5 days straight, handlers hurled live birds at her face and body, resulting in physical injury and emotional distress. Hedren later described the experience as one of the most traumatic of her life. When she resisted his control, Hitchcock allegedly retaliated by sabotaging her career. Despite being under contract, she was given no more significant roles, and the director reportedly warned other studios against hiring her. Her once promising career stalled, not because of lack of talent, but because she refused to submit to his influence. Years later, Hedren spoke publicly about what happened, giving voice to a reality many women in Hollywood had endured in silence. Though Hitchcock remains hailed as the master of suspense, this chapter of his life casts a long and troubling shadow over his legacy. Her story reminds us that fear wasn't only something he created on screen, it was something some had to survive behind the scenes. Hollywood's most infamous rivalry. What started as professional competition evolved into one of the most bitter and long-lasting feuds in Hollywood history. On the surface, they were two legendary actresses at the peak of their careers, sharing the screen in what would become a classic film. But behind the camera, their animosity boiled over into petty sabotage, physical retaliation, and psychological warfare that shocked even seasoned studio insiders. The tension between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford had been simmering for decades before they starred together in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962. Both were fiercely ambitious, both commanded strong fan bases, and both resented being compared to one another. When they finally shared the screen, the producers likely knew sparks would fly, but they couldn't have predicted just how far the feud would go. On set, reports of hostility were constant. Davis, playing the deranged former child star, allegedly kicked Crawford in the head during a scene that required physical contact. Crawford, not to be outdone, reportedly had weight sewn into her costume so Davis would struggle when forced to drag her during another scene. Crew members described a tense and divided atmosphere, with loyalties split and drama as intense off-screen as it was on. Even after filming wrapped, the battle didn't stop. During awards season, Davis received an Oscar nomination for her role, while Crawford did not. In a stunning move, Crawford contacted other nominees and offered to accept their awards if they couldn't attend. When one of them won, Crawford marched on stage, smiling triumphantly, while Davis watched in disbelief. While their feud may have made headlines and fueled public interest in their film, it also revealed the immense pressure women in Hollywood faced to compete, outperform, and outshine each other, often at the cost of their own well-being. The rivalry was real, but it was also a reflection of an industry that pitted strong women against one another for entertainment and control. An open secret that defined a system. For decades, a phrase circulated quietly through the backlots and studio offices of Hollywood: the casting couch. It wasn't a joke. It was an unspoken rule that shaped the careers of many aspiring actresses during the Golden Age. Hidden beneath the surface of glamour was a culture of exploitation, where power and opportunity often came at a devastating personal cost. Young women who dreamed of becoming stars were frequently told that landing a major role required more than just talent. Some were led to believe that compliance with inappropriate advances was expected, sometimes directly by studio executives, other times through agents or managers who arranged meetings that had little to do with acting. One of the most powerful figures of the era, Louis B. Mayer of MGM, was known for controlling every aspect of his actresses' public and private lives. According to various accounts, Mayer would audition young women in private and was notorious for blurring the lines between business and personal conduct. He wasn't the only one. Other studio heads like Harry Cohn of Columbia Pictures were rumored to have similar reputations. Judy Garland, one of MGM's brightest stars, once spoke about the harassment she endured from Mayer himself as a teenager. She recalled moments of discomfort and pressure that had little to do with her performances, but everything to do with submission to authority. These experiences weren't isolated. They were part of a system built to protect the powerful while silencing the vulnerable. The public image of these studios was one of class, elegance, and discipline. Behind the scenes, however, many aspiring performers navigated an environment where silence was a survival tool. If they spoke out, they risked being blacklisted, labeled as difficult, or worse, forgotten altogether. This final secret isn't about a single person. It's about a system that defined a generation, one that allowed stardom to rise on the backs of silence, and serves as a warning of what happens when unchecked power is allowed to thrive in the shadows. The golden age of Hollywood gave us unforgettable films, timeless stars, and legendary moments, but it also hid some of the darkest stories in entertainment history. Beneath the surface of red carpets and silver screens were secrets that studios buried to protect their images, even if it meant silencing the people behind the fame. From manipulated relationships and personal trauma to tragic rivalries and systemic exploitation, these stories reveal a side of Hollywood rarely shown in the spotlight. But the truth matters, because these stars weren't just icons. They were human beings, navigating an industry that demanded everything and offered little protection in return. If this look behind the curtain shocked you, or opened your eyes to the reality of old Hollywood, we want to hear from you. Which secret surprised you the most? Leave a comment below, give this video a like if you found it powerful, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood history. The stories they tried to hide are often the ones that need to be told.